to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul, my co-host Justin Baker here with me as we are about to dive into the summer special of Overtime Hockey Talk, and that is just another top 10 list as we're famous for. And Justin, this is maybe one of my most favorite lists that I have made for the show.
Yeah, this was a fun one. I have to admit, I was excited when we were throwing ideas back and forth, and you threw this one out there. I got a little giddy, got a little chub, so yeah. It was great.
Yeah, a little chub. Isn't it normally little though? So the top 10 list that we're going to do today are the top 10 players without a Stanley Cup in NHL history. So to do a top 10 of this is very difficult because there are so many players who haven't won a cup that are fantastic and were very good players at whatever time they played. There are definitely some obvious ones that have to be on the list, but I really think these lists could be very different. And now, one thing that we both determined before we made our list was that there had to be somebody who was retired. So no Connor McDavid, no Leon Draisaitl, Austin Matthews, none of them can be on this list because obviously they are far from done with their careers, Lord willing. And so it has to be somebody who's retired. I think I have, very few, anyways, on my list, most of the players are well retired. Some of them more recent, but I think I've got a good range of guys throughout the history of the league. What I did find was that it was difficult to really find a player who hadn't won a cup before 1967 that was really good. Because if you didn't win a cup before 1967, you probably weren't really good.
That's very true.
Right? It's just, it wasn't that difficult to find your way to the Stanley Cup finals and win a cup over the course of let's say a 10-year career. There's 6 teams. You've got a pretty good chance of winning. As long as you didn't, especially if you played on Montreal, you definitely won. Basically, as long as you didn't play on Chicago, you were in pretty good shape. Okay. Give me a little bit of a just a glimpse into how you determined where to rank players. What helped push them up the list or drop them down or put them into your just missed.
Yeah, really, my biggest thing was when I looked at players, I really thought about players who were franchise players. They were, when you thought of that team, right, you thought of those players. They were guys who basically drove play. They drove the production for that team. They were basically like heart and soul guys, really, is what I looked at, because to me, those are guys that deserve a cup, right? They, for example, here's a guy who's obviously technically not retired, but you could say with San Jose, right? He's a heart and soul kind of guy. He, really, he drove a lot of play early on in his career for San Jose. Him and Patrick Marleau put that team on their back and really took them far. And so, guys like that really, were really the reason the team certainly went far in the playoffs, right? And had shots at winning because of how good they were and how much they, how much success they had on and off the ice. And so, a lot of that had to do with too. I will say there was a personal bias where, I maybe have 1 or 2 guys on my list that maybe might not make your list, but because I grew up watching them, maybe, I have a little bit more empathy for wanting them to win a cup and wish they would have. So, and then of course, if you're a goaltender, you get an extra little point for me too. So, okay.
Yeah. Let's see. My list consists of 2 goaltenders. So,
mine does too. I love it.
Yeah. The goalie version of this is almost like you got to do just a goalie one. But the goalie, I guess the goalie just is not in control of what the team does in front of him. Like, he can stop the shots. The goalie can let in 1 goal and still lose the game. So, yes, a goalie can absolutely help you to win, but technically, I'll just say technically, a goalie cannot win you a game. He can't. He can't score a goal. I mean, barring the 10 times it's happened in history, a goalie doesn't score the goal. And if your team can't score a goal, they don't win. So no matter how good a goalie is, he has to have a good team in front of him. There's a lot of goalies that haven't won a cup that are good goalies, and it's because of that. They float around. They're granted, over the last so many years, you also have Waugh won a bunch of cups. You've got a lot of the same guys going back to the drink. Brodeur won a bunch of cups, so it kind of held back a couple other guys who may have otherwise won one. But I do have 2 goalies on my list. But before we jump into the list, let's do our just miss. You said you had 4 players on your just miss. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players on my just missed.
8 players. I love it.
8 players on my just miss. I couldn't help myself.
I love it. It's just, this was, a very, very hard list. And I think, it really just came down to, I think a lot of guys got a little bit more of a tip in the cap just because I watched them growing up. And so, but for my 4 players, I'll just jump right into it. One of them is Joe Thornton. He's technically not retired, but let's face it, I don't think he's playing this season. Barring a catastrophic amount of injuries to the center position, then a team might come calling.
I considered him retired, so. Yeah,
similar to, Eric Stahl, right? He's getting the PTO. That might happen with Joe Thornton, if he wants to keep going. So to me, technically doesn't qualify, but I'm putting him on my just miss just because he's kind of in that gray zone. I've also got Ryan Miller, who I grew up just, after Dominik Hasek leaves Buffalo, you think this team's going down the toilet here. But he essentially put this team on his back, similar to what Hasek did for a lot of years. And not only that, but did it for the Americans in the Olympics. I was just devastated when Crosby scored that goal, but I'm sure you loved it.
I wasn't.
So, to me, Ryan Miller was a guy that I wish could have won a cup, and maybe he'll get one in management. And then 2 other guys who are more or less considered power forwards, Jerome Iginla and Eric Lindros, just talented players. Iginla is just a phenomenon. When you think of the Flames, right, he's the guy you think of for the Calgary Flames as far as a franchise player is concerned.
Sure. Okay, my just miss, I'll run through a few of them. I've got Gene Rattel on my just miss. Poor guy, played 123 playoff games, got to the finals 3 times, but never won the cup. He retired as the 6th all-time leading scorer in the NHL, and of course has almost a point per game in his career of over 1,200 games. So he was a killer. I've got Keith Tkachuk. This guy, I'll say some of my list, some of the reason why I included players in some respects, or at least on this just missed, I was like, man, some really good players, not only did they not get a cup, but they barely sniffed it. And they really got screwed with the teams that they were on. And Keith Tkachuk is one of them. He had 1 conference final appearance in 13 tries. So, and that when I say 13 tries, I mean the teams that he was on. He made the playoffs 13 times out of a possible 20 times. So he missed the playoffs. Basically 35 something percent of the time that he was playing, and the other times, 1 in 13, he made it to the conference finals, and only twice did he even win in the first round. Made it to the second round 2 times, so he won a total of 3 rounds in 13 attempts and in 20 full NHL seasons. And he's considered one of the greatest, at least American-born hockey players of all time, and certainly for the time that he played, where he was playing in his whole career was the trap. Almost his whole career was playing in that trap kind of stifling defense, low scoring, and he was one of the guys who was still putting up 30 plus goals every year, despite all that. So, very good player. Never even got close to sniffing it. I have 2 goalies on my just missed. Chuck Rayner for the New York Rangers and Jose Theodore are the only goalies to win the Hart without winning a cup.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, both those guys. I mean, that's at least shows that you were the best player in the whole league 1 year, at least for 1 year. And you never once got your Stanley Cup. So that's a reason to be on there. Chuck Rayner, an interesting thing, he won the Hart in 1950 for the Rangers. And the next player that won the Hart that never won the Cup, do you know who it is?
Oh, can't think of it.
Took 45 years to have another one, which is pretty incredible when you think like the league went 45 years before one of their best players didn't win a championship.
That's a good question.
And it's Eric Lindros.
Yes.
That's the next one.
Absolutely.
He won in that lockout year. And then finally, my last two, I suspect that maybe one of these players are on your list. I have Gilbert Perreault and Matt Sundin on my just missed.
Okay, yeah, obviously, both of those guys did make my list.
Yep, obviously Perreault, best Buffalo Sabre of all time, and I think he only made it to the finals once. And then Matt Sundin, of course, never made it to the Stanley Cup finals with the Leafs. He made the conference finals a couple times, at least a couple times, and had a great career, but just never got there. So
bummer.
All right, well, let's jump into this list. And you know what? I just realized that I have 11 players on my top 10.
So actually, I do too.
Oh, do you? Well, I guess by that standard, I actually have 12, but I have two of them linked.
Oh, okay.
Two of them are a slash because they're, connected at the hip, as it were.
Yes.
I think you could probably figure out who that is. Well, I'll just tell you my number 11 since I got 11 in here.
Go.
I guess I don't have two goalies in my top 10 because I have Curtis Joseph at number 11. Most games won by a goaltender without a Stanley Cup. Tier. Rip for Cujo.
He no longer is.
Oh, who's that?
There is another gentleman on my list who actually holds that title now, Roberto Luongo.
Oh, Luongo. Oh, yeah. You know what? That didn't even pop into my head. But yep, Luongo for sure.
He is freshly retired, so I can see the mistake.
Yeah, you know what? I didn't even. I just don't focus on goalies much. I went, who are like the best goalies that I can think of that don't have a cup? And those are the two that I kind of like from different, because my other one is more from the same era as Luongo. And I would give him the tip of the cap as being the better goalie. And Curtis Joseph to me was just the most fun goalie to watch that I've ever seen. And he got, he was on bad teams, and if he had been on a good team, he would have won a cup. Hands down, would have won a cup because he was so good, and he carried so many teams, but just couldn't carry them over that hump because they just weren't good enough. A lot of those Edmonton teams, those Toronto teams, a bunch of injuries, and maybe the one biggest regret would be that Detroit team. But see, Curtis Joseph was unbelievable in 2003, right? That he was the Wings goalie, and they got swept by Anaheim, and his goals against average was like 1.8, and his save percentage was 9.5 or something crazy, and he still lost because the Red Wings could not score on Jean-Sebastien Giguère.
Yeah, so
sorry to bring that up.
No, it's that is a horrible memory, but actually 03 he got swept. He was a 917, 208, but it was the year after with Detroit. He went 9 games, but they lost in 03-04, and he had a 939 save percentage, 1.39 goals against.
0.39.
Just unreal.
Yeah. And I mean, the previous 917 and a 208 goals against.
Yeah,
I mean, he wasn't letting in any goals. The Red Wings just couldn't score on Giguère. You can't blame Joseph or that was the greatest run by a goaltender in the history of the NHL in the playoffs. And they still didn't win the cup.
Right.
Because the team in front of them couldn't score in the New Jersey Devils. But that Giguère, however many games Giguère played in those playoffs, I would, let's see, that first series went 4. I know they swept with the Minnesota Wild as well. And let's see, he played 18 games and went to the Stanley Cup Finals. and won 13 of them. So 922 save percentage and a 197 goals against in those playoffs as a whole. Only one shutout.
Wow.
Oh no. I'm sorry, I looked at the wrong year. My bad. I was like, that seems low. No, sorry.
Right.
That was 2006-07. That was the year that he actually won the cup. He played 21 games and had a 945 save percentage and a 1.62 goals against average. And he had 5 shutouts. 5 of your 15 wins are a shutout. Unbelievable. So that's and Curtis Joseph the guy won tons of games. He was a great goalie. He just never was on a good team. So tell me who your number 10 is.
Yeah, number 10 for me is a guy who made your just missed list. That is Matt Sundin.
Okay.
From the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Right.
This guy to me was just embodied leadership, right? He was the first European to ever go first overall in the 1989 NHL entry draft to Quebec, which no longer exists. But you know what? Came to Toronto and was just immediately a leader. And unfortunately for him, he ended up finishing his career literally just barely over a point per game. 1,349 points in 1,346 games. And this guy, he only went as far as the conference finals twice with the Toronto Maple Leafs, 10 times to the playoffs, made the postseason. So really the Maple Leafs were up and down and really couldn't find any success. And, of course, that was during the 2000s when they had to deal with the likes of Philadelphia and New Jersey, the Detroit Red Wings. There were just juggernauts in front of them that
they wouldn't
really
have beat the Red Wings in 2002 had they beaten the Hurricanes. So no big deal.
No one was winning that one for sure.
Yeah, I thought about putting him on the list. My issue was was Sundin ever the best center in the league, let alone the best at it. And I just couldn't get there. Like he was very consistent. He was a fantastic player. He was my favorite player growing up. I just had trouble putting him on the list with the thought that was he really one of the best in his era? I don't know that I would put him there. At least, there were certainly times where maybe he was like a top 5 center, but not top 5 player in the league, I don't think. So that's where I had a little bit of trouble with it.
That's fair. But
I'll say that based on my next guy, you could make an argument that Sundin is the same vibe as my number 10, and that's Phil Housley. Phil Housley, same as Sundin. He never won like an MVP or any like really big time award. But Phil Housley has the most games played in NHL history with no Stanley Cup, 1,495 games. He was in the top 3 voting for the Norris once, and was up for the Norris several other times. Was in the top 10 and whatnot. But guy just put up a ton of points, 1,232 points. I am confident when I say that he is the highest scoring defenseman without a Stanley Cup as well. So even though, like Sundin, he maybe wasn't ever the best defenseman in the NHL over the course of his career, and if he had played now and was putting up similar numbers that he was putting up then, in comparison, I think you might have seen him win a Norris. But I think back then you were like, who was it that was winning a Norris trophy for? Was it Chicago? That you were having Norris Trophy winners win that were really good defensemen, not just they put up a bunch of points. Like Randy Carlyle won, Doug Wilson winning a Norris, and I don't think that he was he putting up huge points when he won that Norris in 1982. I guess he put up 85 points. That's no slacker, no slack at all. 85 points for a defenseman, and in the 80s. But Phil Housley put up 97 points in 92-93 and was only 5th in Norris Trophy voting. 97 points. The other players ahead of him, Chris Chelios, great player, but Everyone had way less points than Housley. Kevin Hatcher, 79 points. Larry Murphy, 85. Ray Bourque, 82. And Chelios, 73. And I think that had Phil Housley played now, he would have had more votes. He only had 6% of the votes. In a season that a defenseman had 79 assists. He had 18 goals. Al Iafrate had 25 goals that year. And he only got 4% of the votes for the Norris. Like I just say this to say that I think the way that the Norris is awarded has changed a little bit. We've definitely gone to like, all right, who's the leading goal scorer? Or like, who's putting up a ton of points? You have to be one of the top point getters to win it. And you're not going to win it if you're putting up 40 points or anything like that. So, anyways, I have Housley in there. He's got all the stats to say, hey, I played for a long time and I was really good for a long time, put up a lot of points, and did not win a cup.
Yeah, it's easy to say he was one of the best.
Sure, yeah. 13 times he made the playoffs and had 56 points in 85 playoff games as well. So he definitely was. He was a good pro, really good pro. Unfortunately, he played for the Buffalo Sabres when he was making the playoffs a lot in the 80s. So they lost a lot. He actually only went to the conference finals one time, and you know what? I think he probably went to the finals. He just didn't play them all. He went to the finals with Washington in 1998. That was the only time he went to the finals. Yep.
Didn't work out well for them.
No. I'm confident when I say that he did not win a game in the Stanley Cup Finals. In that case, who do you have at number 9?
All right, number 9. I have a guy who you talked about, right? Not winning the hardware, but this guy finished. My only defenseman on the list finished 6-time runner-up for the Norris Trophy. Unfortunately, played in an era where he had to go up against Bobby Orr and
Bradley Park.
Denny Potvin. But yes, Brad Park went to 3 Stanley Cup Finals. Cracks me up. I look at the voting for example, in 75-76, he had 59 points in 56 games. Managed to finish 5th in the Hart Trophy voting. Now, if you had told me that you had a defenseman who finished 5th in Hart Trophy, you would more than likely say he probably won the Norris.
Yeah.
Right. No, not at all. Finished 2nd that year, of course. So
it's a Bobby Orr.
Who did he finish second that year? I'm sorry, Denny Potvin. Yeah, okay. Denny Potvin came in with 98 points that season.
Baby. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and Denny Potvin finished 2nd behind Bobby Clark.
Oh, so 2 defensemen were in the top 5 of.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is a guy who was clearly at the top of his game and one of the best in the league for so many years. I mean, he was just. I felt bad because he had to play on these Boston teams where you have to follow in Bobby Orr's shadow, right, in the late 70s and early 80s, and then, of course, goes to Detroit during the Dead Wing era, so no luck there, and, again, went to the Stanley Cup Finals 3 times, but just couldn't manage to seal the deal.
I believe he lost to Montreal.
Sure did.
At least 2 of those times in the late 70s, right? He lost to Montreal.
Yeah.
And then earlier did they lose to Boston when he was on New York?
Yeah. Sure did. Yeah, okay. In 77, 78. But,
there we go.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the crappy part is he got to play in the 72 Summit Series and was the MVP of the 8th and deciding game. I mean, this guy was on the All-Star team 9 different times. So he was, literally one of the best, and retires from the NHL in 85 and then gets voted in first year in 88. So this is a guy who clearly was highly decorated, looked upon by his peers as one of the best in the game, but just ultimately couldn't close the deal.
Yep, absolutely. He was he's on my list too. He's at number 8, so
okay,
he'll be coming up. I wanted to take this time to just talk about before I give you. Well, okay, I'll give you my number 9. Then I'll throw this little tidbit in there. Of the most cursed player in the history of the league, in my opinion. My number 9 is my dual threat. That's Daniel and Henrik Sedin, who both players, I'll say, technically won an MVP. One of them won the Hart, and one of them won the Pearson. So, or what it was called, the Pearson at the time. I think the
The Ted
Lindsay Award.
Yes.
Whichever one it was called at the time. So we'll say both of them had MVP type seasons. Obviously, both really great players. We'll never see anything like it ever again. And the two of them are truly linked forever. Very similar stats all throughout their career. And, two fantastic players. And then the fact that you have these two unbelievable players and only get to the Stanley Cup Finals once, it just kind of shows how, there were just some better teams out there. Unfortunately, Roberto Luongo had some mishaps, kind of fell apart in a couple playoffs. I think that if he had, maybe, I don't want to say that he's not mentally tough, but like he had some big breakdowns in a couple of those series. Particularly, am I remembering one against Chicago, where he let in a ton of goals, and he maybe lost them a year because of the way that he played in the playoffs, and unfortunately, especially that loss to the LA Kings, where the Canucks were coming in, the top team in the league, and they lose to the Kings, who I think the Kings went on to win the Cup, right? Was that the year that the Kings won the Cup?
They sure did.
Yeah. So, I mean, good on them, but I think that the Canucks had a great shot to win the Cup that year, and they should have beat LA in the first round, and they just couldn't. So, Daniel and Henrik, there you go. Are they higher up on your list?
Oh, they are on my list. That is for sure. Yeah,
yep.
But not that much higher.
All right. We'll get to your reasoning why they are where they are when they hit your list. My number 8 was Brad Park, so I don't have to give you my number 8, but I'm going to tell you my most cursed player of all time.
Please do.
Kind of in like a positive curse, though. Like no one's going to complain about being the 32nd all-time points getter in the playoffs. No one's going to complain about being the second highest scoring player in Stanley Cup Finals history, although without a cup. Without a cup. I guess you would complain about that last part. You go to the Stanley Cup Finals 5 times, and you lose all 5. I mean, you got to the finals. That's pretty sweet. But you lost all 5 times. That player is Brian Propp. Brian Propp, in 1980, goes to the finals with the Philadelphia Flyers, loses in 6 games to the Islanders. And then the true curse begins. In 1985, the Flyers go to the finals against the Oilers, and they lose in 5 games. Then in 87, they go to the finals again against the Oilers and lose in 7 games. Then in 1989, Philadelphia loses to Montreal in 6 games in the conference finals. So the next year, they ramp it back up. He actually goes to the Boston Bruins and loses in 5 games in the Stanley Cup Finals to the Edmonton Oilers again. So 3 times in 5 years, he lost to the same team in the Stanley Cup Finals. Then in 1991, he gets traded to the Minnesota North Stars, who go to the Stanley Cup Final again and loses in 6 games. So, I mean, he didn't quite pull off the Hossa or the Perry, where he played for 3 different teams and lost in the finals, but he was very close. Like 89, he loses in the conference finals with Philadelphia. 90, he loses in the finals with Boston. And 91, he loses in the finals with Minnesota. And the difference being, Hossa got his cups. Perry had a cup. So nobody's complaining there. But yeah, anyways, he has the most points in Stanley Cup Finals history without a cup. Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. Most points in Stanley Cup Finals history without a cup. 22 points in 29 games. He's 32nd all-time in playoff points and the second most without a Stanley Cup.
I love it.
So that's I'm not going to go and say that Brian Propp is one of the top 10 best players without a cup, but good Lord, he was a really good player, and he just couldn't win it. I mean, 32nd all time in points in the playoffs. I mean, that's some elite company that you find yourself in, and did not win a cup. So, anyways, that's my little anecdote.
I love it.
Who's your number 8?
Yeah, number 8, I have the Russian Rocket, Pavel Bure.
I like it.
Yes. I mean, listen, this guy could score some goals, right? 2-time Richard winner. He actually had back-to-back 60-goal seasons and doesn't win the Richard, you think, in the early 90s, coming into that left-wing lock era. And so, ultimately, I mean, he could score some goals. He was the fastest guy on the ice anytime he was there. There was nobody faster than him. I honestly think he could have probably beat Connor McDavid or Dylan Larkin in a speed skating contest at the peak of his the height of his speed, basically, to put it simply. But man, this guy could fly. He could score goals. He knew how to finish, and ultimately he was never on great teams. He was on good teams, but never great teams, and so he was the guy that always just seemed to drive possession, drive offense for his teams. And, unfortunately, in the only trip to the Stanley Cup Finals in 93-94, he had to go against the Rangers, and Mark Messier would not be denied that year. So there was, unfortunately, no hope for Vancouver that season, even though he did manage to put up 31 points in 24 games, 16 goals in 24 games, nothing to balk at. So
had a great playoff. Yeah, he's a fantastic player, especially, like, it's sad that his career kind of took a dip after he had a lot. I believe it was back injuries, if I remember right.
Actually, knee. There was a lockout year after 02-03, and then he just called it quits because he said he couldn't play at his elite level anymore, so he decided to just shut it down. Yeah,
this is where this list is just nuts. I don't have Bure on my list, and could I? Sure, I'll take Bure. Yeah, maybe over some of these guys. Maybe the reason that I don't have him on here compared to these guys is that I guess it's because some of these guys played longer careers, and so they had even more heartbreak. You're like, oh man, how did he not make the finals or win a cup kind of thing? But Bure, I kind of understand because his window of being a really good player was relatively short in comparison to a lot of these guys. That, I guess, that's my only excuse here. But okay, yeah, man, guy won 60 goals that year in 93-94. Crazy.
And back-to-back years, just unreal.
Yeah. And still didn't win the goal scoring leader, did he?
Nope.
Because you had Teemu Selanne and Alex McGillney go off in 92-93.
Didn't even get Hart Trophy consideration. I mean, in 94 he finished 12th in Hart voting, but that was it, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Crazy. That's it's tough because he was a great player, and some of the the Russian stuff from the early 90s. I kind of take the voting as a little bit, I give it a little a lot of those writers were Canadians, and there was a little bit of an anti-Russian vibe going on.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't think that they would have voted a Russian to win it anyways. So I think that definitely played a part. I mean, he was in 99-2000 though. He was third in Hart Trophy voting for the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, but I will say in 93-94, Fedorov did win the Hart, but he was
and the Selke. Was that the year he won the Selke too?
Yeah, he was miles above everybody else as far as play was concerned. So,
yeah. And he's playing in Vancouver. He's on the West Coast at the time. Watching hockey far less accessible, so you don't have the ability to watch a guy the same way you do watching the Detroit Red Wings, being on the East Coast. So there's that too. Great pick there. My number 7 is Mike Gartner. Quite possibly the most consistent player in NHL history. The most 30-goal seasons in a career, and
15 to start his career too.
15, and we're not talking like he just scored around 30 goals. I mean, no, he had 40. Well, he had 50 once, and then he had 40 another 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. and one of those was a 49 goal season. And it's what's crazy for the amount of goals that this guy scored, and even late into his career. I mean, in 96, 97, he's scoring 32 goals as a 37-year-old, 35 goals as a 36-year-old. I mean, he was a good player, and for everything that he did, I mean, he was never on voted on an all-star team. Nothing. I mean, 1,335 points in 1,432 games, 708 goals. Quite possibly the best pure skater. I mean, he held the record for the fastest skating thing in the All-Star game for years until Dylan Larkin broke it. But I mean, I'll give a little bit of yes, but look at the skates that they use now compared to the skates that they used in 1990.
They weigh about 10 pounds more.
Yeah, there's a big technology difference that definitely would give you, that extra 0.1 seconds that you need in there. But, man, for my money, Mike Gartner is just so consistent, so good everywhere he went. He played for the Washington Capitals, Minnesota North Stars, the New York Rangers, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Phoenix Coyotes. He scored 30 goals. He had 30 goal seasons for every single team that he played for, and you can't deny what the guy did on the ice, even if he didn't necessarily get all the accolades. His full body of work over the course of his career is just there probably will never be a player like him ever again. But he just, I think he went to the conference finals once, and that's it. He won only 4 times in the out of the first round out of the 15 years that he made the playoffs. So just kind of was on. I mean, he was on some lesser teams and had to go up against some juggernauts later in his career too. So, let's get your number 7.
Number 7.
Sorry. I forgot one thing. The worst part for Mike Gartner. In 1993-94, do you remember who won the Stanley Cup?
Oh yeah, I was saving this one for when he hits on my list, but please go.
The New York Rangers traded him at the deadline to the Leafs, and hey, the Leafs had a good playoff. They went to the Game 7 of the conference finals. He almost played his old team in the finals, and lo and behold, Toronto loses and the Rangers win the cup. So that's really the closest he ever got to winning the cup. My thing was, why did the New York Rangers trade a guy headed into
their coach?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Their coach wanted somebody who brought more grit to the team, and so they give up a perennial 30-goal scorer to say, let's go get some more grit. And I mean, granted, yes, it worked out for New York, but they probably, I have no doubt they would have still had success. Yes, absolutely.
For Glenn Anderson.
Would it have still worked out if he stayed in there? I probably think it would have.
I would think so. Yeah. Glenn Anderson had 6 points all playoffs that year.
Right.
And, he had 7 goals in 35 games for the Rangers in total, his regular season and his playoffs. My God, 42 penalty minutes in the playoffs that year.
Yeah, and it's not like Gartner didn't produce for the playoffs either. The year before, in 91-92, with the Rangers, he put up 16 points in 13 games.
Right.
With Toronto, 11 points in 18 games. So,
he had
the production was there.
That year, he had 34 goals.
Yeah.
But anyways, well, that's, What can you do? What can you do? Okay, let's go your number 7.
I've got a pair of guys at number 7, the Sedin twins for me.
Mm-hmm.
Again, these were guys that basically are franchise guys, right? Like I talked about with, Jerome McGinley. When you think of this franchise, Vancouver, that's who you're going to think of for quite a long time.
Yep.
Unless, Elias Pettersson can get his act together and win them a cup maybe down the road. Who knows?
Nope.
Nope. But, and then again, the reason I give them a little bit of a knock over a guy like Pavel Bure when we're talking about Vancouver is just because, both these guys at one point in their careers were considered the best in the league. So,
yep.
Again, you can't deny what these guys did for this team. And I would have loved to have seen them win over Boston, because Boston is probably down there as far as teams that I hate the most, and right there with Colorado. So
there you go.
Sorry.
Yeah. We're on the same boat about Boston. Speaking of the Boston Bruins, I have a player who played for the Boston Bruins at number 6. Didn't play there his entire career by any means, but I have Adam Oates. Most playoff points without a cup. 163 games played, and he has 156 points in the playoffs, but yet never won the Stanley Cup. He did make it to the Stanley Cup Finals, was in the playoffs 15 years, made it to the finals with the Washington Capitals in 1998. Once again got swept, and he had a nice career, like getting out of the first round, was in the conference finals early in his career with Detroit. He made it to the third round in 86, 87, and in 87, 88. I mean, Adam Oates basically, he made Steve Yzerman an even better player, right? Like he took a really one of the league's best and gave him, like, he was the Nicholas Backstrom kind of vibe to Ovechkin with Yzerman, and then with Brett Hull. And then, he goes to Boston and Washington and kind of plays that older veteran role. But, one of the best assist men in the game. And Adam Oates just never got his cup.
Okay, love it.
You're number 6.
Number 6, I've got Daniel Alfredsson.
Another guy I thought about putting on there, but didn't.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think this is just one of those guys that I just really enjoyed watching growing up. I mean, this was a guy who just seemed like that heart and soul. He embodied everything. When you think of leadership, right? He's a guy who you could easily mesh in there with guys like Yzerman, Sakic, Mark Messier, as far as leaders are concerned. I mean, he did everything for this Ottawa team, and managed to drag them into the playoffs on multiple occasions. Honestly didn't get any of the big awards as far as the Hart or anything like that is concerned, although he did win a Messier and Clancy trophy. But ultimately, I think the highest he ever finished was 5th in Hart voting. But, again, he did everything he could for this Ottawa team. They managed to go to the Stanley Cup final, and, they got so dang close.
Yep. That Anaheim team was just so good.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but I mean, he managed to put up 22 points that year. It was good production, and he always produced, right? And he was a line driver. It didn't matter who was playing center with him. He was always, picking this team up and doing what needed to be done. And
he was a guy that played a ton too. Like, you look at his ice time, even late in his career, at 35 years old, he averaged 22 minutes and 17 seconds. In 70 games for Ottawa.
Even at 19 minutes. That's top-line minutes now. So.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I mean, he didn't put up big points that year. He actually he had a pretty good year for Detroit the one year that he played there. And I know it was just injuries kind of knocked him out. But,
sure.
Yeah, really, really good player that just so happened to play on a team that couldn't find itself a win against against the Maple Leafs in the playoffs. I mean, so many times they lost to the Maple Leafs in the playoffs. I believe it's 3 times that Ottawa lost to the Leafs in the first round or second round. So, 2000, 2001, they got swept by the Leafs. And I think earlier before that, they lost to the Leafs in 6. And then they lost to the Leafs again. It was just a rough time against the Leafs at that time. And the Leafs, I remember it was like, how do we build our team to beat the Ottawa Senators? And that was like the Leafs' goal. As long as they could beat the Senators, it was like you won the cup. It was almost the way that it was like, just beat the Senators. We got to beat the Senators and go through the Senators. Now, I remember that year that the Leafs swept them, Ottawa was so good. Ottawa was the 2 seed coming into that. That was back when it was like 1-8, 2-7 and all that. And Ottawa was the 2 seed, and Ottawa had beat the Leafs 6 times out of 6 in the regular season, including a 5-0 win in the last game of the season going into the playoffs. And then the Leafs swept them. That's something that just doesn't usually happen, that kind of thing. But unfortunately for him, just couldn't usually, like, had the one nice run, but was stopped short several times because of, honestly, their goaltending, I think, in Ottawa was never as good as the other team that they were going up against. So you had like Patrick Lalime and Ron Tugnut and kind of these like C-level goaltenders that, when you're going up against Curtis Joseph a bunch of times, Ed Belfour, like what are you going to do?
Right. Exactly.
And I think some Ryan Miller later on as well. Actually, they are the ones that beat Ryan Miller in 2007 to go to the finals. That was who they played in the conference finals.
It was.
We're into the top 5. Number 5. You want to go with your 5?
Why not? I've got my my first of 2 goalies,
okay.
Roberto Luongo.
All right. I have a goalie at number 5 too.
Ooh, give it to me.
I have Henrik Lundqvist at number 5.
Okay, he is on my list, but just a little higher.
A little higher. Okay. Yeah. Okay, well, let's tell me where Lundqvist is on your list, and then we'll just have a little conversation there with those 2 guys.
Lundqvist comes in at number 2 for me.
Oh, okay. All right, he's way up there. So second best player ever to I can respect that. I mean, he was what do you think about the fact that Lundqvist only won 1 Vezina in his career?
Yeah, I think when I look at something like that, right, I immediately go to wins, right? Because this was a team that basically, when he played for the Rangers, right, there were a lot of years where they just didn't have really, really good teams. And yes, he would get 30 wins. But look, I mean, he had to play, for example, when he finished second, in Vezina voting in 2012-13, right? 43 games started, but only won 24 games. So it almost seemed like, the year after, 13-14, played 62 games, but only 33 wins. Right, because that's what this team was. They weren't going to outscore you like the Toronto Maple Leafs, right? Could, or some other teams. Today, like when we look at like Edmonton, for example, right? Maybe a lot of their goaltender stats are ballooned up a little bit as far as wins because of they can go out there and outscore you. So because you look at it like again in 17-18, his goals against average was almost 3 goals a game, but he still managed to put up a .915 save percentage. So he's stopping the puck just when you're getting, 2,000 shots against you a season. It's because your team in front of you just can't keep the puck out of their own end and doesn't know how to score to win you games. So that was the problem with Lundqvist when I looked at his career is he played on these mediocre Ranger teams that, the only reasons they really, went far was just because he would literally throw them on his back and drag them through the playoffs. I mean, look, he had 4 straight seasons with the Rangers of getting .928 or higher save percentages, which is just crazy, or 2.14 goals against or less. So, I mean, literally all you had to do was score 3 goals or and most nights 2 goals, and you were winning a game against the Rangers.
Yep, that's very true. He is second in playoff wins without a cup for a goalie. Who do you think's number 1?
I would probably go with Cujo if I had to guess.
It is Cujo. Yeah. Cujo with 63, Lundqvist with 61. I was trying. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The next highest that I can find. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, goalies with a lot of wins that usually you end up with a cup at some point.
Right.
And I think the next highest after that is Pekka Rinne with 45 wins.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, when you look at guys like, for example, my number 5, Roberto Luongo, right? He is a guy who essentially, carried Florida for so many years, was just a fantastic goaltender in Vancouver. But, look, Luongo played over 1,000 games. That kind of longevity is unheard of. There's literally, I mean, when we look at NHL players, right, you get to 1,000 games. That's a big milestone, a big deal for you. But when you think about goaltenders, guys that only play at the most 2/3 of a season because of, the physical strain this position takes on you, there's literally only 3 goaltenders in NHL history that have played 1,000 games or more. And two of those, guys, I mean, have multiple cups with Brodeur and Patrick Roy. So,
also not to mention the fact that he did play a full season in the AHL too.
Right.
So that's like a full season's worth of games, I guess, in the AHL.
Right. It wasn't like Marc-Andre Fleury where he came in as a highly touted goaltender and starts right from the get-go, right? So
he was fourth overall, but yeah, he
played a terrible Islanders team.
Yes, the Islanders, and then gets traded to a terrible Panthers team and was unbelievable. Like 03-04, terrible team. He played 72 games and only won 25 of them.
Right.
And had a .931 save percentage.
Yeah, you want to talk about carrying your team.
It's like one of the greatest seasons of all time for a goalie, and they only won 25 games. That just shows you how horrible that team was.
Yeah, and
just
also shows you why I think he deserves to be number 5 on my list, because he was that dominant as far as a player is concerned for his team. And
he certainly had some fantastic years. Don't think he ever won a Vezina, did he?
Yeah, he's got one.
He does have one.
No, he didn't. I'm sorry.
No.
He doesn't have.
He
won a Jennings.
A Jennings, yeah, but never cracked the Vezina winner. Lots of good goalies in the league, but yeah, that I guess would be the one little knock. But I think he'll be a Hall of Famer.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, again, he played on some terrible Florida teams, and a big reason why you have to, or a big reason, or something you need to win the Vezina is you need wins, right? Because you're not going to give a Vezina to a guy who wins 20 games. So
no. Although 931 save, I mean, you could still say he was the best goalie in the league. It's not a most valuable player, like it's just who's the best goalie. He definitely was, but
yeah, in 03-04, I mean, Brodeur had a .917 save percentage, but he won 38 games. Kiprusoff.
Which is stupid, because the reason he won is because of the team in front of him. 100%.
Right, exactly.
But it also was a bias. Like, people love Brodeur. They didn't really like Luongo. Like, Luongo was kind of a dick, and that hurt him too, I think.
Yeah, and so was Kiprusoff. He was a dick too. But, I mean, he had a .933 save percentage and comes in, so, it's just, it is what it is at that point, so.
Yeah. That's why, why don't we just let the players vote for the Vezina too? Or like have a media, here's all of our trophies awarded by the media, and here's all of our trophies awarded by the players. That's what I want. Okay, so I had Lundqvist at 5, you have Luongo, and you have Lundqvist at 2. Who do you have at 4?
At number 4, you have already spoken about him, but I have Mike Gardner.
Oh, okay. All right. You got Mike Gardner higher. All right. Good for you. Yeah. Good man. Good man.
Yeah, I felt bad for him because he gets traded from the Rangers in '94, so I gave him a little bump for that. A little sympathy bump.
So brutal. Yeah. So my number 4 is I am surprised, based on the way that you spoke from, that it didn't make your list. I have Jarome Iginla as my number 4.
Okay.
2002, he wins the Pearson. Doesn't win the MVP. Doesn't win the Hart. He just wins the MVP chosen by the players. Doesn't win the Hart because I believe the Hart goes to Jose Theodore that year.
Yeah, he took everything that year.
and I think that the players were just kind of like, no, come on, Iginla needs something. So they gave him that. He also wins the Art Ross and the Rocket Trophy that year. I think he tied with Rick Nash and Kovalchuk that year for the Rocket. Was that year?
Yeah, Rick Nash and Kovalchuk. You are correct, sir.
41 goals. I think it's like the lowest to lead the league in scoring, at least in before that. I think maybe it was the 50s or something like that. But I don't think anybody's led the league with only 41 goals other than lockout years in a long time. I don't think it's happened again.
Yeah, it was dry. That's for sure.
Yeah, that was like peak New Jersey Devils kind of vibe. Like the Minnesota Wild were doing it. Their Jacques Lemaire impression, like, oh, brutal. But yeah, I mean, Iginla, he tried to chase his cup too at the end and just like kept picking the wrong horse and picked the Bruins too late, picked the Penguins too late, and it just didn't end up working out for him. But such a good player. I mean, the fact I legitimately would say, I mean, he was the best player in the NHL at one point. Just absolutely phenomenal. Played in such a way that like it couldn't last his dominance because he played so hard-nosed. Was a really good player later in his career too, but just he couldn't last because he was like your prototypical power forward, which doesn't usually You're not going to be the best player in the league as a power forward for like 10 years. It's just not going to happen. But Jerome McGinley, you know what he did do? Do you know that from 1980 until Jerome McGinley won the Art Ross Trophy, that only 3 players before that had won the Art Ross? That's Gretzky, Lemieux, and Jagr.
Yeah, it's
3
crazy.
players in 20 years. And Ginla was the first one to break it, to crack it there. So,
good for him.
Yeah, good for him. Okay, let's go. Your number 3.
Yeah, number 3, I have Gilbert Perreault.
Okay, yeah, you got him way up there.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, listen, this guy is the greatest player in Sabres history as far as I'm concerned, and that famous French Connection line. But unfortunately, never got to the Cup final, and 1,326 points in 1,191 games. So, his number's retired for a reason. And so coming in at number 3 is Gilbert Perreault.
All right. Let's see. My number 3 is it may be higher on your list. I'm sure that he's on your list. Might be number 1 highest scoring player in NHL history without a cup. One of the 3 players to lead the league in scoring and not win a cup. The other 2 being Jerome McGinley and my number 2, Marcel Dion.
Okay, yeah, he is number 1 on my list. Okay, Spoiler alert.
Yep, I figure. Yep, he's number 1 on a lot of lists. I didn't put him there because I don't believe that he was the best player ever, like the best player in the league. I know that it's not necessarily fair because Gretzky was there, and what the hell are you gonna do? But I don't know that he was even the second best player in the league at the time. Really, like the I guess in 78, 79 and 79, 80, he was, I guess he was top 3 there. Won the Pearson twice. So, certainly had the accolades. It's not to say he wasn't a fantastic player. But the 2 guys that I have ahead of him, I think were just better when they were good. So that's my reasoning, and I'll reveal those players in a moment. But you have him at number 1. I hate to cut off your. Well, why don't I'll just tell you who I have 1 through 3. You can tell me who you have 1 through 3, and then we can just talk.
Go.
So Deanna 3. I have Joe Thornton at number 2.
Okay.
And I have Eric Lindros at number 1.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I like the Eric Lindros. Joe Thornton is a technicality for me. He doesn't make my list because technically not retired, so I'll give you an asterisk retired on that one. Yeah, so my 1 is Dion, 2 is King Henrik, and number 3 is Perreault. Basically, so Marcel Dion, really, I really could have flipped a coin, between him and Henrik Lundqvist as far as who I put in at number 1. But, I mean, Dion played on some really bad teams, which is kind of why I gave him the nod, right? I mean, he was the reason his teams had any sort of regular season success. I mean, he comes into Detroit, again, they don't really have any talent with him to play, so they never made it to playoffs. He gets traded, goes to L.A., unfortunately never actually made it past the second round, which is just crazy to me. And that's, just a testament to how bad I think the LA Kings actually were at the time, because he physically would drag them into the playoffs the way he played. I mean, when you're putting up 130 points a season and you still can't have any playoff success, clearly that proves why the NHL is such a team sport, right? You need other guys to contribute because, again, Austin Matthews, best player in the league this year, but couldn't get out of that first round because, other guys aren't contributing, right? I mean, it's just the way it goes sometimes. You need to have other guys helping out. And so, again, this guy was so talented. I feel like if he had been on a team where he had competent players around him, like Gretzky had Messier and Curry, so on and so forth, I mean, he could have been so much more. I feel like, the way he played the game, he was just so slick, so smooth. And, at 5'9", you think for a guy that just is so small in an era where guys are throwing elbows left and right in the 70s for sure, that he wouldn't have any success. But, man, he proved doubters wrong. So, not only could he pass the puck, he had good mitts, but he could finish, right? 50 goals multiple times. So to me, he comes in at number 1. And, Henry Lundqvist, while again I agree he thinks that he was definitely a guy who carried his team in the playoffs. He wasn't solely the reason they would get in the playoffs, but again, he unlike Marcel Dion, was actually the best player in the league at his position at a certain time. So maybe that's the one knock you could give on this pick here. But to me, it's just the production out of Dion and the lack of production around him was just the reason I gave him just a slight edge, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. Just, this is just, we mentioned, and I don't disagree that it's such a team game and that you don't win with one player. But it is interesting to note that from the first time the Art Ross Trophy was awarded in 1948 all the way to 2002 when Jerome McGinley wins it, in that, what's that, 54 years? It took 54 years for somebody to win that and then not end up winning a Stanley Cup. He's the first player to ever win the scoring title and never end up winning a Stanley Cup.
Right.
That's crazy. It took that long. And so that, I mean, you've got Jerome McGinley, Joe Thornton, and that is that it? And then Marcel Dion.
Yeah, I mean Dion was.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess it was. Yeah, it went to 1980 when Dion won the scoring title.
Right.
That was him there. Yeah. So I mean, outside of that, it is interesting that in between Gretzky, Lemieux, and Jagr, you've got two of the three guys who never won the cup to lead the league in scoring. Right there, two of the three. So then the other one's Joe Thornton, and then Henrik and Daniel, back-to-back seasons. And we'll say, I don't know that Jamie Benn's ever going to win a cup. And I have to think that the Oilers will eventually break through and win a Stanley Cup. So all these, five Art Ross trophies between Draisaitl and McDavid. I got to think that that'll be eventually they won a cup or two in there. But we'll see. I mean, it's obviously much more difficult to win a Stanley Cup when there's 32 teams as opposed to even 20 years ago when there were 20 teams and 16 teams were still making the playoffs, and there were also auto bad teams in the league, whereas now there's now it's not quite that drastic. You don't have the brand new teams coming into the league to just totally beat up on them for a few years. But yeah, anyways, I just to get to a couple players that my number 1 and my number 2 and my number 4 were not on your list. So it's just, that's probably the most drastic contrast we've ever had in making a list. But Eric Lindros, for my money, out of any player on this list, I would take him over anyone in here. To build a team around. I would take him to build a team around. If all things are equal, he's healthy, and we're in the same era, kind of everyone's equal across the eras, I would take Eric Lindros. I think there was a 4-year span where Eric Lindros was truly the most impactful player in the NHL. He was unreal, and I would take Eric Lindros. And then second on this list, I would take Joe Thornton. To build a team around, man, I'd take Joe Thornton all day. In his prime, I think he got beat up a little in Boston. I think he would have had an even better career had he not had some weird years in Boston. But just he was a modern day NHL guy. If he had started now, I think he would have been even better because he wouldn't have gotten touched.
And he could sauce it.
He could sauce it.
Best passer in the league for so long.
He actually may be one of those guys that doesn't matter what era he would have been in, he would have been freaking good because he could sauce it, and that's all he needed.
And he was big too. So you could go play back in the the tougher eras where guys are throwing elbows, and he'd still survive. Yep, very true.
But yeah, it's no knock on Marcel Dion. I know he put up tons of points. I guess I wonder, you can kind of take the point or take the adjusted points and do that stuff where that would lie. I don't know. I I can't remember where to grab that stuff from, but you can go and find the adjusted score, adjusted stats based on the years. But apparently, funny enough, he has like his number one comparable is Joe Thornton on Hockey Reference, and the fourth best comparison is Jarome Iginla. So apparently, they all have something in common. These players that don't win Stanley Cups. But
that's too funny.
Well, Justin, any final thoughts before we sign off today?
Oh, man. Just getting ready to take a trip. So, the listeners are going to be without me for a little bit. So
no!
I know.
It's okay.
It's tragic. I know.
I'll manage. You're going to Hawaii.
Yeah, I got to go to Maui for sister-in-law's wedding.
How long are you going to be there? I
will be there for 9 days.
Oh, look at you. Nice. Well, unfortunately, what that means for everyone else is that they're just going to hear me talk about things. So, our next show, I'll break down some of the. Oh, yeah, Kadri signs? Yeah.
Hopefully that happens, and we see Phil Kessel or maybe some other free agents get signed here.
Yep, for sure. Well, yeah, you'll tune into our next show. It'll just be me. Maybe I'll find a guest if I am so inclined. But talk about news and things going on in the NHL, and then when Justin gets back, prepare yourselves for another top 10 list as we continue our summer specials here on Overtime Hockey Talk. Find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you guys soon.